Welcome to another episode of Void to Value. I'm Elaine, and here is my co-host Ro.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here again with you. And it's a bit of a special episode for me because I've got my cousin. I want to say my little cousin because growing up, he was always very much smaller and younger than me. And now he's a lot taller than me and probably a bit more mature. But anyway, we won't dwell on that bit. And so, welcome, David. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much, both. It's really lovely to be with you.
And David, why don't you start by telling people a little bit about you?
Okay, so I am a husband and father of two children. I work in IT in East London and I've had a slightly peripatetic existence of living in a bit of England, a bit of Africa, a bit of Switzerland, and a lot of boarding school, rather sadly, but there we have it. And currently live down in Kent with my family, apart from our youngest daughter, who is up in Birmingham in school.
So why is she in Birmingham in school if you're saying that boarding school was a big thing for you, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, you're outing it already. She is a wonderful ballet dancer and has gone to a ballet school up there, which is pursuing a passion that she loves and is something that she chose. Whereas I don't think either of us would have chosen that for either of our children, but here we have it, and she's loving it, which is a wonderful redemption of the boarding school story of my life.
Yeah. And I love that it really is her passion. I've seen videos and photos of her dancing and everything, and you've allowed her to do that, even though it perhaps wasn't what you would have chosen. It's
Yeah.
amazing. So tell us what's the story you want to bring to share today?
So at the end of 2021, we were coming out of whichever round of lockdowns it was. And it had been a pretty hectic couple of years with COVID really making a mess of the small business that I run. So we do IT support for different purpose-driven organizations. And with a team of about 25 of us, we suddenly discovered that some people were in hospital nearly dying. People had parents in hospital that did die. We had people having children that they weren't allowed to see when they were born in hospital. They couldn't be with their partners in hospital. And all of that stuff kind of hit you like an HR fire hydrant because we did not have any HR support at that time. Whilst clients were screaming for us to move them to the cloud, and that was a very difficult thing to do when everybody was trying to do that. They were asking for laptops, which sold out faster than toilet paper did because all of the school kids had bought the affordable ones. And then they stopped paying our invoices in many cases, which was quite complicated. A number of them went bust. So there was a massive cash squeeze on the business. There was a huge HR trauma event. And at home, we had two children, one doing the 11 plus and the other one trying quite hard to get into the Royal Ballet Associates with all the homeschooling that went with it. So it was quite chaotic. And then part way through, we discovered that my wife had breast cancer. And shortly after that, they found a tumor on her pituitary gland. And it became, um, yeah, a bit of a health catastrophe, really. And when you've got a global pandemic going on at your front door, and you then have this disease invade your house, it sort of felt like death was always on the doorstep. And it was incredible that by the end of 2021, our eldest had got through the 11 plus and into a wonderful school. Our daughter was loving the Royal Ballet. Um, and my wife was through the cancer operation and everything was okay on her health front. And it was very unexpected to discover that just as the business was okay and the family were okay and my wife was all right, suddenly I could no longer cope. And it wasn't that my head was worrying about anything, but even being exposed to very small stressors, my body started to freak out. So I think there was some football match on TV that my son was very keen to watch. He invited me into the room. I lasted 20 seconds before I left, pretty much ready to throw up. And I'm someone who really doesn't care about football. I didn't care particularly about either of the nations that were playing. And yet my body could not cope with the anxiety of it. It was bizarre. And so, having been through all of the mess, as soon as everything was all right, I very much wasn't, and found myself struggling to deal with a lack of stamps. And if your business is one where people call up to complain about their computers not working, it's not a helpful position to be in if you can't cope with minor inconveniences.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I mean, I know you're my cousin, but I didn't know all that happened at the same time. And I guess this touches my heart because I, about 10 years ago, just as post divorce and with my children, as things got a little bit easier, that's when I crashed. So it's really interesting the tally there. So if we asked, I guess, initially, in the time of, with your wife being sick and all the stuff with your kids and the COVID, where was God for you in all of that bit?
I'm very, very blessed that about 8 years ago, I heard about spiritual direction. And I had heard the words before, but never understood what they meant. And when I discovered what they meant, I went and grabbed my vicar one Sunday and said, "Look, is there any chance this is available to mortals rather than clergy? And could I have one?" And he said, "Well, you need to go and talk to this lady." So I called up the lady that heads it up for the Diocese of Rochester, and she ended up meeting with me, talking to me, and then taking me on for spiritual accompaniment, she would call it. And so at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, she took me through a process called the spiritual exercises, which is an Ignatian tradition. And it's something that I've come to see as the scaffolding in my life. So every morning I wake up and I do a bit of study of the Bible, usually not more than about 5 or 10 verses, very small chunks, a lot of imaginative prayer. And then at the end of the day, I do the examine, which is a review of the day, looking for what am I grateful for? What have I learned? What brought life? What dragged me down? What have I messed up and need forgiveness for? And what am I hoping for? And the rhythm is that every day you do those two sections, and every week you look back over your week for what's been going on and you write out the highlights. And now, every 6 weeks before I go and see my spiritual director, I look over those 6 weekly reviews and I rewrite out just the highlights of the highlights. So it's like a distillation process. And I think through it all, quite often that felt very, very dry. It didn't feel easy. It didn't feel particularly rewarding to do it very often. Um, but it felt like one of the most important structures that kept me upright and kept me going. And one of the bits that I love the most of the whole thing is actually those weekly reviews. And there's a chance to sit down and look at the highlights. And I think because each day the review begins with gratitude, that's definitely always where there's the most written for me. By the time I've got to what have I stuffed up, I'm not keen to explore that in too much detail. So it's definitely weighted with lots of good stuff at the beginning. But coming to the end of a week, it's astonishing how, even in the midst of some of the worst mess I've experienced, there was so much good going on. And it builds the most remarkable awareness that actually, even in the mess, there is so much good. And I think if I didn't have that written record, it would have been so easy to focus on the mess and all the reasons to say, "Oh, poor me, isn't it awful?" And yet, I think through it, and because of uh, that constant reviewing and the distillation, you can't escape the goodness of God. It's not that easy to get away from all the good stuff that's going on, even when things are just completely falling to bits around you. It was amazing.
Wow, that's quite something. And I think we might try to put in the show notes that that start and end of the day, those questions that you were asking, if that's
Mm,
okay.
yeah.
Um, so when you got to a point where you had to walk out of a room, if there was any stress or what did you do? How did you manage?
Um, well, because it was pretty much Christmas, I had a chat with my colleagues and agreed that it would probably be good to get a rest. I had just been to a new client meeting that had gone extremely well with a charity in Wimbledon, and I had got back to Waterloo East and pretty much collapsed on the station floor. So I was fine. I'd had breakfast and everything was all right. And then suddenly I had a massive attack of dizziness and was sort of hyperventilating on a station bench, going, "Gosh, I don't know that I can get down to the tube, let alone back to a train." So I called up the office and said, "I've been sat here for about an hour now. I'm not convinced I'm going to make it back this afternoon. I think I might go home." And they were very kind about me going home, which was lovely. And so I planned for a 3 week holiday, which was great timing because over Christmas very little happens in the particular world that I inhabit, which is great. And I think the first thing that came to mind was I should probably go and speak to my counselor again. And after a set of fairly dramatic events about 5 years ago, I spent a year working with a counselor that was extremely helpful. And so it was wonderful to know that there was somebody I could go back to and could kind of um, turn on the taps of "please help me" again, which was brilliant. And I sat down with her, and I think it was probably close to the end of the first session, or maybe even the second. I don't think it took that long, actually. She looked at me and she smiled and she said, "This is the most fantastic textbook of a midlife crisis, David." It's like, "Oh, good.
Really?
I'm so pleased." And she
Yeah,
said,
thanks.
"It's it's so clear and it's so unusual to be able to see one season coming to an end in somebody and a new one struggling to begin." And I was like, okay, I'm glad that's clear for you. Anyway, she
Mm.
recommended me a couple of books, and one of them has this terrible title, but it's absolutely superb, which is by Dr. Tim Cantofer, Depressive Illness, The Curse of the Strong. And it sounds much more maudlin than it actually is. But it talks about people who are prone to overwork, often out of overextending themselves. They're just too keen to help. And it's looking at the kind of the dark side of the coin, if you were, for people who think of themselves as strong and helpers and that kind of thing, and how regularly that leads to burnout, how common it is. And I think quite early on in the first chapter, he talks about his party trick of if he's in a room full of people and he meets someone, he can describe them pretty much to a T. And as I read through this kind of character assassination in a paragraph, I was like, oh dear, yeah, this guy's got the recipe for where I'm at, which is great. So I spent some time looking at that book and his recommendations. And the key thing was for me that something is going to have to change. It was not okay to take a break and go back to life as normal. You can try and do that, but you'll probably burn out again, and it will take slightly longer next time. And you can set yourself up for that pattern if you really want, but he didn't really recommend it. And he talks a lot in there about antidepressants and how they work and why you might want to consider them. Um, and I found that really, really helpful to read through at my own pace and bounce off my counselor, who I saw for about 6 weeks. One of the recommendations was to go off on a retreat. And so I called up some friends who run a retreat center. And the big issue for me is that running a business that I started 17 and a half years prior, um, I didn't know how to change jobs. When you've got 25 staff and um, you, you run it and nobody else ever has, it's a bit weird to think, "Well, I wonder if I can go and stack shelves at Sainsbury's," because that's what I wanted to do. Everywhere, every day I went and got my lunch, it was like, I wish I worked here. That would be so much less stress. And it was on the retreat that was hosted by two friends who are both trained as spiritual directors. One of them asked me the question, and we were walking on the moors in Yorkshire, and it was a very windy day. So we were having to shout at each other. And he turned around to me and he said, "Well, you've looked at working part-time and that hasn't added up for you. And you can't see that it's right to change job. So if you know it's not right to quit the job, but you know it's not right to go part-time, what would bring life?" And that was the question that unlocked everything for me. And thanks to the daily review, given that the third question is what brought life, I suddenly was like, ooh, I know this question. I can answer that. And what happened was the immediate response was it came out of a conversation I'd had with my wife about a month previously, where she said, I really hoped that one day we'd have an overlapping day off together. She works 3 days a week. So my first answer was, I want an overlapping day off with my missus. It was like, good. What else? And the ball was rolling. And so I realized I wanted to be back in the office with my colleagues, not always working from home. I wanted to make sure that I got to the Wednesday lunchtime church service I go to, where the worship has been so transformational for me for the last 20 years. And in a fit of slight petulance, I said, I want to go swimming in London again, where the pool is longer than it is locally, because I like a long pool, because I get good headspace there. And what emerged was a recipe where my week was um, one day off, one half day, um, very much centered around what it takes to survive, not what I have to do. And that bought me the 8, 9 months it took to plan handing over the running of the business to somebody who had some resource to do it.
Okay. That's quite a process, isn't it? And you've had a lot of help with it and you've been vulnerable. I mean, thank you for sharing because it's, especially from a man, for a man to say, I've thought about antidepressants and I had a breakdown and I needed help with this. And, in my experience, men don't really talk about that as much as we do as women. And, I've been on antidepressants, I've had a breakdown, but it's more common, I think. But I guess what might help people, just a quick question before we finish, would be, do you think God allowed you to have your breakdown to change so that you could become who you are now? Or where would you see God in that last process?
Um, I would hate to second guess God's purpose in any element of my life. I suppose where I see him in it is that he is a God of seasons. And I think where I had assumed that a calling was something that you had for life and you definitely couldn't change, um, it was wonderful to hand the business over to a young man who shares my faith and 2 years later is still running the business despite all of the challenges. Um, and it's an invitation again to trust God, that actually where he calls us, he is there with us. And as somebody once said to me, God, if you're going to put me there, then the problems aren't just going to be mine, they're jolly well going to be yours, and you can help me, please. And it's been wonderful to be able to step back and learn how to rely on God. And in the professional sphere, I think it's really difficult to manage that line of where am I going too far in my own strength and where am I not doing enough on my own? I don't wake up and say, God, well, I'm not going to get out of bed until you tell me which pair of socks to put on. He's given us a lot of autonomy. At the same time, my job now is to bring in new clients for the business. And normally, most of our competitors spend about a salary a month on AdWords and things like that. We do no marketing, no advertising. And yet, over the last 2 weeks, I've had 12 different businesses come to us saying, please, could you do our IT support? And I know that I can't go learn how to do a marketing role. I haven't got the bandwidth, but it's clear that it's still right for me to be in the business. And so it's almost like, well, God, I'll show up, but you need to do the difficult bit of bringing the work in. And it's been astonishing to see how much work he's bringing us when lots of our competitors have got not even half that, despite spending far, far more.
Wow, amazing. That's so encouraging. Where when you're in the right place, God's favor shows up.
Mm,
Well, David, would you mind praying for everybody who's heard this?
sure, I'd love to. Father, I thank you that you've called each one of us by name, and you know exactly where we are, even when the storms are worst. There is literally nowhere we could go to hide from your love. And I thank you that as the father of the prodigal son, even before we've shown up to say sorry, you are running towards us. You love us and you accept us, no matter what state we're in. And as the author of the human condition, you understand our weaknesses much better than we ever could. We are dust, Lord, and you remember that. And you love us all the same. Help us to receive your love and to walk forward with a renewed trust in you. Amen.
Amen.
Massive thank you for that, and thank you for being prepared to be honest and vulnerable. I, one of the things I'm hearing from what you're saying is actually that you've learned to be kinder to yourself, and I've been through a lot of trauma. I know Ro has, and we've had to learn the same sorts of things. Is to be kind, and to be kind on days when you just can't quite cope with it as well.
Yeah.
To allow yourself to, for me, sometimes it's to go to sleep for an hour or to even just sit and play a game on my phone and not use my brain. Sometimes it's that sorts of things that for me is kindness to myself, and that's where I find my strength again. So huge thank you for coming on.
Well,
Um,
Elaine, very quickly on that, what you just said there, it's interesting that our ability to be kind to ourselves is almost set as the threshold for how much we are able to love others.
Absolutely,
Love your neighbors as yourself. If we're no
absolutely.
good at that, we're actually never going to be good at loving them either.
It's completely true. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time. Bye bye.
Bye for now.